You're listening to The Rule of Law, the educational podcast sponsored by All Rise, where we focus on the intersection of law, technology, and storytelling. And now, here's your host, Lauren Round.
Welcome to Rule of Law. In today's episode, we sit down with a trusted voice in the legal AI conversation, Colin Levy. We unpack what law firms should be doing differently to be successful in implementing AI and how to avoid the traps that cause so many tech initiatives to fail. We also dive into how the next generation of lawyers is approaching AI and what's around the corner for the legal industry. Colin, welcome to the podcast. Where are you recording from?
Thanks for having me. I'm recording from the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts, where it's beautiful but rather chilly, at least right now.
Yeah, I'm in Austin, Texas, for a trip, which is a nice treat because it's going to be 75 degrees here today. So I feel for my colleagues on the East Coast this week. Well, thank you for joining. We're very excited to have you on. Before we kind of dive into things, we always start the show with an icebreaker. So your icebreaker question is, what book or podcast or TV show has your attention right now?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about two things. One is a book and one is a show. The show is Black Mirror, which for those who don't know it is essentially a show about people and technology and their relationship between the two, and it tends to take a pretty dark, sometimes violent approach to it. But really, I'm thinking about the show in terms of, human judgment and how we decide when we should be relying on technology and when we shouldn't, and how our own judgment plays into that. Which then leads into the book I'm thinking about, which is what I would call classic Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This thinking about things in two different types of systems sort of, again, relates to where human judgment plays a role in the context of technology and in the context of other things as well. And in this day and age of sort of everything being thrown at our face very quickly and very bluntly, that we remember what makes us who we are and what makes us human.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard of Black Mirror. It's been on my list, but I haven't got around to starting it yet. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But I know that there's a large following. That's a very popular show.
It is. It is.
Well, let's get into some substance. You are a very, trusted voice in the legal community on AI and legal tech. So I have a lot of sort of timely topics to get into. But if you could start by just telling us about your background and your journey to where you are today.
Absolutely. So currently, I'm general counsel at Malbec. It's a contract lifecycle management company. We help large companies manage their contracting function from start to finish, from drafting contracts to negotiating them to tracking them to editing them and amending them and so on. And so it's a fun space, especially given my history as a transactional corporate lawyer, which really is my background, having worked for a variety of different technology companies as well as a couple of manufacturing companies. And so that's sort of my professional journey. I also currently am an adjunct professor of law at Albany Law School, where I teach a course on technology and law practice management, which is kind of an intro-level course to legal tech. And then I also will be teaching a course solely focused on AI and AI's role within law. And that sort of educational bent ties into sort of a lot of what I do in addition to sort of my day job, which is creating content to help people learn about the legal tech space from both the theoretical as well as a practical perspective.
Cool. I definitely want to get to some questions about your experience as an adjunct professor in the AI space, because I think you're sort of on the front lines of that topic. Before we get to that, I kind of wanted to start high level with some framing questions. There's a lot of resources out there for lawyers about sort of which tools to implement, how AI can create efficiency, et cetera. But you've talked a little bit about sort of taking a step back and making sure that as an attorney or as a law firm, you have the right approach and the right frame of mind. So when we're talking about AI in 2026, maybe let's start with what are some questions that lawyers should be asking as a starting point that maybe they're not always asking right now?
Sure. So I think it's an interesting question you pose because I've observed a lot of lawyers, unlike in the past with technology, have been attracted to AI like moths like to a flame and getting burned, which is interesting considering how skeptical and change resistant lawyers have long been. Um, but more specifically, I've seen this question come up all the time. Is this accurate? How accurate is it? Can I rely on this? When I really think a better way of perhaps framing the point of that question is asking instead, what decisions am I making and which ones would benefit from being helped by AI versus which ones are entirely sort of reliant upon human judgment? And they're also not really asking kind of what the feedback loop looks like. Understanding sort of what the right tool is, what works, what doesn't work, and perhaps also more to the point is what happens if this works or doesn't work? What will I lose, so to speak, if this works, and what will I lose if this doesn't work? So I think you have to think about things from the perspective of intention and of your ultimate goal, as opposed to thinking about things in terms of just sort of a very tactical question of is this accurate or not?
And on that note, and sort of, I hear a lot about the accuracy question, but I also hear a lot about efficiency and measuring efficiency, how much time AI can save you, etc. But on the note of asking the right questions, you said that it's not necessarily the right shift to sort of just plug AI into something that you're doing today. Plugging it into existing workflows isn't necessarily the right thing to do. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Sure. Here's the thing really about technology and about automation and layering technology onto something. Technology has a really good way of highlighting what works and what doesn't work, meaning that if you have a broken process or a broken workflow to begin with, technology is going to enhance those problems and what's broken. So it's going to make them even worse. It's not going to solve them per se. So in addition, it's kind of goes to this whole thing of garbage in, garbage out. You put something that's bad into a tech tool, it's going to spit out something that's even worse likely. So you have to really ask yourself, again, this goes back to what I talked about with intentionality. If I were just starting from scratch, where would AI fit in? Rather than how would just make my existing process better. You have to think about it. Okay, if this was, if I had an ideal process, what would that look like? And how would AI and how would any technology fit into that ideal process? And then go from there, because you need to have a solid foundation to build off of. Otherwise, you've got yourself essentially a house of cards.
And I mean, have you seen or heard of lawyers resisting that? Because I'm just thinking, as a practical matter, a lot of lawyers do run their firms with their own bespoke workflows that they've developed over the years, and they kind of refer to it as a method to the madness. And they know it's not perfect, but it's more or less working right now. So, I mean, do you see that as kind of a big jump for attorneys to restart their workflows, or do you find that a lot of folks are open to it and happy they kind of took the step to rethink?
So I see it less as sort of as a jump and more of this tension between having something that sort of works versus something that always works, and doing the kind of due diligence, if you will, to get to a point where you have something that will always work. And that's kind of, I think, the step a lot of people are often afraid of or unwilling to do because it takes time and it takes effort, and you don't see results immediately from doing that. You see results from doing that plus adding in the right tools, if you will, into that process or into that foundation. But the challenge is building that foundation. A lot of people are somewhat unwilling or completely unwilling to do that because they have something that, this works well enough. Well enough may work for now, but it's not always going to be good enough. And so rather than run that risk, I would suggest being proactive about it and actually putting in place a process that's more likely to work more of the time, in addition to taking advantage of the benefits that AI and other technologies can offer if you have the right foundation to build off of.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Um, on that note about workflows and kind of steps in the process, we know that AI today is becoming more and more capable, but there are still gaps, hallucinations, etc. And so there's a sort of double checking and verifying that's built into the process. And I've heard a lot of lawyers complain that they maybe aren't saving as much time as they thought they would or as they think they should be because they have to double check everything. Thoughts on how lawyers can kind of break free from that verification loop and maybe strike the right balance between letting AI help you, but also at the end of the day, recognizing that they still have to be responsible for accuracy.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things at play there. One is you kind of have to know yourself and know sort of what you are good at, what you're not good at, and what you and trust what you know. Uh, you know, think about doctors and other medical professionals. They all serve a distinct purpose. They all have a distinct knowledge base that they can rely on. And so because of that, they can trust themselves to know certain things, but they know that if they see something that feels like a little off, they know they need to double check it. In terms of lawyers using AI, look, if something seems like it's, too good to be true, or it seems too perfect, or it seems like, yeah, this doesn't seem right, yeah, you should be checking that. In addition, um, you know, being a lawyer and having a duty to your client to, follow your ethical duties and, the best version of yourself and best lawyer that you can be for your client, you need to double check your work. And that's just something that I think anyone would need to do, regardless of what they're doing, regardless of the stakes, whether they're high stakes or low stakes or medium. Um, so as people may seem kind of questioning, well, why do I have to double check my work? Because shouldn't AI just be perfect? No tool's perfect. And in addition, no human is perfect. And if you think about it even further, humans are the ones creating these tools. Humans aren't perfect, so how can you expect the tools to be perfect if the humans aren't perfect and they're the ones creating the tools? So that's sort of, I think, the mindset that at least I take to using AI tools. Um, in addition, you have to understand how they work, and also understand that different tools do different things differently, and some are better at different things than others, and that comes from experimentation and from a better understanding of the different types of tools that exist and how they work and what data they've been trained on.
That's a perfect segue into the next topic I want to talk about, which is legal tech, because you have worked in this space for quite some time. And I think it's something a lot of attorneys are struggling with how to sort through the noise and how to find good, reputable vendors that are going to do what they say they do. And we go to all the tech shows, and so we see all of the solutions out there, and it's very overwhelming. And we know that it's more common than not for law firms to buy a solution, commit to a solution, and then end up abandoning it later. It didn't work out, or they stick with it, but they're disappointed by the value they got out of it. So back to sort of the framing question, but in the legal tech space, what questions should lawyers be asking before they jump in and buy one of these tools and invest time in implementing it?
Sure. Well, I think the first question that has to drive the kind of the process is, what are we trying to solve for? What's the problem? and what does the ideal solution look like? And you need to have a very specific idea of both of those things and let those specific ideas drive the process. So that's the first question, or sort of two questions that are tied to one another that I would ask. Um, Secondly, is what does ideal look like in practical terms? What does it look like in 60 days? What does it look like in 90 days? What does it look like in 120 days? Not in sort of some vacuum or some theoretical context. That way you'll have a better understanding of what you're willing to accept, what you want to be seen, and you'll know if you're seeing it or not after a certain period of time. And it also gives you a way to measure. And then, I think another really important question is who takes ownership of the tool, both in terms of its just operation, but in terms of its, fixing it or adjusting or what have you after it's put in place. You need to have someone be the leader, not just champion getting the tool, but champion the use of it afterwards, and be the person who's sort of the go-to with respect to that. Because if you don't have that, then people are lost, and people may be excited about the tool. Those people are likely to be the same folks who were excited about it before you even began looking at tools, because they want to use one to begin with. But it leaves the other people who were skeptical or not really open to the idea, but then became open as they learned more about it, and the dust, really, because, well, I need help. If you don't have someone that can help you, that's a problem. You also need to understand that, you should be asking yourself and asking your team and asking whoever you want to ask, do we have a culture that actually supports this change? Do we have a culture that is open to this process? And yes, it starts at the top, but it also expresses itself from those sort of below the top who are using the tools on a daily basis. Are these folks who actually want change and are willing to change? And those things are super important. And oftentimes it takes a little bit of effort to get those answers, but those answers are incredibly important, and you definitely should have them before you start even evaluating a tool, let alone buying one or deploying one.
Yeah, and I think it also what you mentioned about the culture and the implementation periods, it doesn't happen overnight. You can't do a culture shift overnight. And I totally understand the perspective that some attorneys are coming from, where it's uncomfortable to learn a new tool or a new workflow. So I understand the resistance, and I think it's a long-term effort to shift some of that culture.
It is. It definitely is. It's I think that's what folks also perhaps don't always appreciate, is the fact that it is a journey. It is a marathon. It is not just a overnight thing where one day you're doing things one way with one tool or a set of tools, and the next day you're doing things completely differently with a completely different set of tools.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of setting time tables and goals in 30, 60, 90 days. What are some, so those are really good benchmarks for that I think can guide law firms. But as I said earlier, we know even with the best of intentions, a lot of times these tools and initiatives don't work out. Any other common signals that law firms should look out for, that an investment that they made or an initiative that they started is kind of headed toward failure, not headed in the right direction?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think it probably applies both to law firms as well as legal departments and any company that is trying to invest in a new tool or that is likely to fail. And I think it starts with basically being able to explain why we're engaged in this work, why it's important, and it has to be less about the individual that is pushing for it and more about the benefits to the company, and even more than that, more about the benefits to those who are being asked to take part in it and engage in it. They need to see it as something that is beneficial for themselves, as something that is going to help them be happier, be more productive, and frankly be just more better at their roles, but in a way that they appreciate and they like. And so that's why it really starts with understanding people and listening to them and having them be a part of the initiative from day one. And that means not just the executive leading the charge, it means the decision makers, it means the users, it means every sort of segment of the populace in a company or in a law firm that is part of the initiative needs to be on board and aligned with what is taking place. And that starts again with understanding why in terms that are explainable, repeatable, and are simple.
Hi there, it's Riza, your favorite AI avatar. You've probably seen me on some of my All Rise social media posts recently. Anyway, I just wanted to pop into Lauren's podcast to encourage you to take a few minutes to learn about All Rise. It's an award-winning AI-powered practice management system that's perfect for mid-sized law firms. It handles everything from client intake to final billing. Oh, we're also a Microsoft partner, so All Rise works seamlessly with the Microsoft applications you already use every day. Check us out at allrise.ai. Okay, let's get back to the podcast.
I want to ask about your perspective from sort of the other side of the table. We talk a lot about the lawyer perspective and what things they should be thinking of and how they should approach these implementations and tools. But from the technology provider perspective, any thoughts on what the vendors can do better in having conversations with law firms?
Yeah, I think vendors need to start with and always be clear about one thing, which is honesty and transparency. They need to be honest about what they can and can't do, meaning what the vendor's tool or solution can and can't do, and transparent about why that's the case. Because the only way you're going to build a relationship, which is really where success comes from, with a potential prospect and would-be customer, is by building a trust, a relationship built on trust. And so those are the ones who are able to explain, look, this is working, this works well for this purpose. You're telling me you want this. I'm not sure we're the right solution for you because we can't do that. Or sometimes it starts with having an actual honest conversation with the law firm's expectations and saying, look, what you're wanting isn't realistic, even if you were looking at a million different vendors or a completely different vendor that you were paying even more money to or wanted to pay more money to. What you're wanting just can't be achieved right now. Down the line, perhaps, but not right now. So I think that kind of level of transparency and honesty is really where success comes from. And I think that's where legal tech vendors can always do better. Because too often, I think it's the case where they're sort of claiming they can do a lot of things, some of which they can do, some of which perhaps they can or can't do. But the bottom line is, once you say something and repeat it and claim you're being honest about it, if it comes to find out that that's not the case, that relationship's lost and you've just burned a bridge that likely can't be rebuilt down the line.
Yeah, and it only takes a couple of those before the reputation of the entire company has sort of shifted. So yeah, vendors have to be really careful about that.
Absolutely. And I get it. Look, vendors are in the business of selling, and they want to sell. But I think that best type of sale is one that starts from a relationship that's been built up over time and maintained and feels less like a buyer-seller relationship and more like a friendship or more like, a friend that just so happens to be you selling you something.
Yeah, for sure. I want to shift to a different topic, which, still on the theme of the people side of things, and ask some questions about kind of the generational differences in how lawyers are approaching generally this time that we're in. We've talked a bit in previous episodes about the next generation of lawyers, and as I said, you're really on the front lines of this with your teaching position. And as you mentioned, you're involved in teaching generative AI to law students, and a dedicated class on AI. Can you tell us so far what your experience has been like working with the next generation of lawyers and how they might be approaching some of these questions?
Right. So great question. generally I found that the younger generation, they grew up with tech. They accept tech as part of their reality. I think what they find, um, you know, needing or wanting is a better understanding of one, how these things work, so that they can understand how to use them better, and two, how to use them less as sort of just a tool for doing seemingly random things, but more of how to use it in a strategic, intentional way. And so and so they need to better understand kind of the types of tools that exist and how they work, so that they understand that the outputs are the way they are for a specific reason. And so, to put this more specifically, one thing I talk about, and I think I talk about not just with my students, but with experienced lawyers and legal professionals as well, is providing the right inputs or prompts to these tools and understanding how to provide the right context to get the right output. And not just thinking because the technology exists, it has existed for some period of time, that automatically means it's trustworthy or it's reliable or anything. I think that teaching a certain degree of healthy skepticism, I think, is helpful, and that comes from learning how these tools work and why they don't always get things right.
So aside from, I mean, understanding how the tools work, understanding what the tools are informed by, are you seeing any other glaring skills gaps when you're in class with these students? What should the law schools be teaching that they're not teaching right now? And that could be about AI or other skills that we haven't talked about.
How much time do we have? I have a lot of thoughts on what law school gets right and gets wrong, and haven't been that shy about sharing them. But suffice it to say, for purpose of this podcast interview, I think law schools have traditionally focused way too much on legal history and how the law came to be, and far not enough time on kind of practical skills and actually applying kind of, well, here are the laws, but how do you think about them in the context of a given reality, and not just some made up, set of facts, but more in the context of some client, some person comes to you with a long story, and they have a whole bunch of issues and they don't know what to do, but they feel like there's something that legally they should be doing or want to do. They just don't know what. So you have to figure out how to fit things into their story. And in addition, they need to know that as the lawyers and law students, they need to understand kind of the tools they can use to best help their clients. And that largely these days is technology. That doesn't mean we all need to be coders or programmers, but it certainly means we need to have some degree of fluency in the language of technology as well as the language of business. And so that means law schools need to focus on teaching technology skills and awareness as well as business skills. And yes, I will even argue financial literacy skills to lawyers, because the world runs on data, it runs on business, and it runs on technology, and you need to have awareness of that, because that's the reality you're entering into. The reality you're entering into as a law student when you become a lawyer is not the reality of law school at all. And so that disconnect has long existed, and it's long been pretty bothersome to me.
Yeah, I agree. When I was in law school, which is a long time ago, I always actually loved my adjunct professors because, no hate to the tenured professors who taught full time, but the adjunct professors would come to class having just left the courtroom or just left a settlement or a conversation with a client, and they would tell you about it. So you would get that firsthand, timely, real world context. But then again, that's not what's on the bar exam. So I understand from both sides, but yeah, I think agreed all around. There's lots of gaps in law schools. Yeah. Okay, so before we end, I want to get to a lightning round question, which I always find is a challenge for lawyers because we like to over-explain things, but we're going to do the best that we can. So a couple quick questions here. What is one area where AI will never replace humans?
So I'm not a big fan of this whole idea of AI replacing humans,
Okay.
because we don't really understand how our brains work and how we're even self-aware. So at least fully, so how can we possibly replicate the entire human experience? But that being said, I think that one area where AI can never replace human is where there's a large degree of emotional intelligence needed, and where you really need to be supportive to someone for any number of different reasons, but it's very emotionally driven and it's somewhat unpredictable. I don't think AI is going to replace that anytime soon. It's going to have a very difficult time understanding sort of the emotional element of what it means to be human.
Certainly agree with that. What will we laugh about in a few years when we look back at what we're debating today with AI?
The fact that, things we seemed concerned about at this stage of the AI journey, and the fact that those concerns seem to pale in comparison to the concerns we have now down the line, because I think we're just so early in the AI journey. As much as progress has been made, there's so much more progress to be made, and I don't think we fully appreciate that quite yet.
And last lightning round question, what is one legal tech purchase that teams will regret in a couple of years down the line?
I'd say something that doesn't integrate with anything else, something that just does one thing, even if it does it exceptionally well, doesn't integrate. I think eventually that's going to become an annoyance because people don't want to switch systems. They like to work within one system and then just have different things within that one system, for better or for worse.
Definitely. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Colin, for all your insight. This was all super helpful. I think our listeners a lot of them are still trying to navigate how AI is going to work in their practice now and into the future. So we really appreciate all of your insight. In closing, what is the best way for our listeners to follow you and to learn more about your work?
Sure. Two areas. One is on LinkedIn under my name, Colin S. Levy. Another is my website, colinslevy.com, COLINSLEVY.com. I have a current book, The Legal Tech Ecosystem, available on Amazon. And then I also have a forthcoming book on AI and lawyers coming out this fall. So more to come on that front.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Colin. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening, and join us again for another Rule of Law podcast from All Rise.